Because I know a lot of people want to go to lunch, and it's always awful being speaking before lunch. I was born in the foothills of Appalachia. I was born right outside of Pittsburgh in a coal mining community, and I was born there. In many ways, it resembles when I was born there in the '80s, but Wichita is starting to go through now. The steel mill industry wasn't quite leaving yet, but it was starting to, and it's a lot of the same economic anxieties that we're starting to see. There's a really bad echo here.
No, it's not.
Oh, it's fine? Okay. So we're starting to see some of the same economic uncertainties that you're seeing here in Wichita right now. And a lot of them are based around energy, trade, and a lot of other issues. And it's created a general anxiety. Where I was born in Westmoreland County, Pennsylvania, which is right in southwestern Pennsylvania, in 1988, a few years after I was born, the county voted by 57% for Mike Elk. And this was a heavily unionized, lots of union jobs, lots of industries. In 2008, the vote for McCain by 54%. That was nearly a 15-point switch in about 20 years. And during that 20 years, the county got significantly more racially diverse. And so it wasn't quite a result of racism as much as a lot of the economic anxiety. And if you look at West Virginia as well, which I'll talk about a good bit, West Virginia shifted for 70 years up until 2000. They never voted for a Republican president with the exception of 1984. And they've always voted solidly Democratic because they were union members and they believed in that, despite being some of the most racist, most religious people on the face of the universe. But something fundamentally has changed post-NAFTA, post the disappearance of a lot of the manufacturing jobs, a lot of the safety net. And it's influenced, I think, unions on some occasions to be on the wrong side of these issues. And the most prominent example of that is the Keystone Pipeline, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, which would bring this tar sands oil that's awful down from Alberta, Canada, the whole way through. It's stalled somewhat right now. A number of unions, construction unions and the Teamsters, supported the Keystone Pipeline. And now you can say, well, how bad is that? But it meant jobs for these construction unions. And with their members out of work, they felt they had to do it. This is often the equation in organized labor, especially with construction unions, that they're in favor of things like nuclear power, coal-powered power plants, because it means jobs. As Murray Kempton, the famous labor journalist, once said, if the construction unions could get the contract to rebuild the gas furnaces at Auschwitz, they would. And that's often been the situation in the labor movement. But this year, when the construction unions were pushing the Keystone Pipeline, something very different began to happen. Something that hasn't quite been seen before, which is that a number of unions stood up and said, no, we're not going to do this. They didn't have a direct interest. None of their members' jobs were on the line. You saw two of the biggest public transit unions in the country, the Amalgamated Transit Union and the TWU, Transport Workers United, come out and say, we're not going to support this kind of pipeline. Investing in a pipeline is just investing more in fossil fuel. We need to be investing in things like public transit and other kind of green jobs. And so the AFL-CIO stayed on the sidelines, and John Boehner, the Speaker of the House, tried to come out and say the AFL-CIO was supporting the Keystone Pipeline. And Trumpka, the president of the AFL-CIO nationally, went to the UN Investor Climate Summit and gave a speech which was pretty remarkable for a labor leader. I cover the labor movement and its internal politics a lot. AFL-CIO presidents never talk about internal divisions in the labor movement. It's uncommon. But he went to the UN and he made it very clear that the AFL-CIO did not support the Keystone Pipeline, that they did not have a position on it. And then in a very frank, honest discussion, he weighed out the pros and cons, that obviously tar sands oil is a bad idea, and at the same time you got to balance creating members' jobs. But he said something that was unique and something that was different, is that what we're facing is the reason why people wind up supporting these kind of jobs in places like Appalachia, where I'm from, is because there's such a fear and a culture of intimidation in those places. People are afraid of losing their jobs. There's an anxiety. And in the United States, where losing your job means losing your house, possibly divorce, possibly God knows how many other things, of course you want to have coal. Coal is that, if that's your livelihood, why would you move away from that and create all that kind of economic anxiety? And so this is really the backdrop that I think the environment is struggling against. I think Trumpka, a lot of national labor leaders are investing in green jobs, but how far does that go exactly? It's been a mixed bag. I think they're trying to be good faith partners, but there's certainly areas on nuclear energy where a lot of unions are in favor of that. They consider that green energy. I know that conversation there is a bit controversial. And then there's other areas where, the mine workers union supports mountaintop removal in West Virginia, despite the fact that mountaintop removal has eliminated far more union jobs in underground mining than it ever created in above surface mining. It's about a fourth of the jobs in mountaintop removal as there was below ground. It's God knows how many times worse. So there's this terrible intimidation going against most workers. And it's against this bigger backdrop of intimidation going on in the workplace. And one of the things I want to talk about in addition to that, just to shift, is what the Koch brothers are doing. It was really fascinating to drive by yesterday, the fortress out there that the Koch brothers had. I mean, apparently they got pretty swallowed up by this, and they had about 30 security guards out front, and all kind of fences that they were putting up because they were afraid, that folks were going to knock it down. Which I found pretty fascinating, as well as the fact that they released these emails that claim people were issuing death threats against them, which was just really
fascinating. Probably his own brother doing it too.
Probably. But the Koch brothers have been threatening workers in their workplace, and one of the things, working with my colleague Mark Ames, that we discovered is that we were writing for The Nation. We were just writing about a contract struggle with Georgia Pacific, and we discovered that the Koch brothers had been paying attention to Citizens United more than anybody else. And we discovered that what the Koch brothers realized is that Citizens United now took away laws that forbid employers from talking to their workers about politics. See, because previously under the 1973 FEC law, employers could not go up to somebody that was working for them and say, hey, how are you voting? That's considered unfair intimidation. I mean, there's a relationship between an employer and an employee where there's an implicit threat of extortion, which is, if you don't agree with me, you can hit the road. So what we discovered is that the Koch brothers were paying very close attention to this. And that at Georgia Pacific, which is a huge paper chain, employs about 60,000 workers, they were sending out letters, 18 pages, huge documents to the workers telling them how to vote, telling them which candidate to vote for. And on top of that, they were holding seminars in the workplace that workers were required to attend or risk being fired, where they were going on about libertarian principles and all kind of, right-wing bullshit dogma. I shouldn't swear in church, I'm sorry. So they were going on and on about this right-wing dogma, and then they stamped on the back of everybody's time cards the 8 core principles of Koch Industries. And it just created a whole culture of intimidation. Now, the idea of your employer campaigning among you is really dangerous. Imagine if your boss comes up to you at work and says, hey, all the other guys here at work are going down to volunteer for Moran this weekend. You coming? If you're in a threat of potentially losing your job in a bad economy or a layoff, you go and you volunteer, you do whatever you need to. I mean, this is going to unleash a whole new level of bad politics. And on top of that, they've also advised, they're starting to advise a number of corporations that, hey, you guys should start engaging in this kind of politics among your employees. We saw with Delta, there was a horrible anti-union measure which makes union organizing in the airline and the railway industry more restrictive than it was under Bush, that just got passed and signed by a Democratic president. There was a horrible measure that Delta lobbied for, because Delta is largely one of the few airlines that's non-union, for the most part. And Delta would go up to its workers in the workplace and say, hey, free ticket to Washington this week. You got to go lobby for that bill. You got to go lobby against your own rights to join a union. And if you didn't do that, well, you might see the door. They won't say that exactly, because that's illegal. But your boss comes up to you in a workplace and tells you to do things in this kind of economy, you're going to do it. And so a lot of people I talked with at Delta went against their will. They flew against their will to Washington, and they lobbied for a bill that would make it more difficult for them to have the fundamental right to collectively bargain and organize. So we're seeing this new trend, and the Kochs are really changing the environment in a way that we haven't seen before. And I'm going to get into one other area, and then I'll probably open it up to questions, because I could go on and on about organized labor for a while. One of the areas that, and one thing I want to get about the Kochs, and one of my colleagues who I work with, Mark Ames, I don't know how many people have heard of him. I'm sure a lot of people have heard of Matt Taibbi. But Mark Ames and Matt Taibbi edited a paper in Russia before they came to the States. It was an English bi-weekly, in which they talked about the Russian oligarchs in the late 1990s who were stealing everything through privatization. And they did some really crazy gonzo stuff. I mean, they would pie New York Times reporters that were bad reporters, and they would just do all kind of crazy stuff. But they really exposed the oligarchs for what they were, and they got all kind of death threats. And early 2009, Mark was the first person to write about the influence that the Koch brothers were having on this Tea Party movement. He wrote about it for Playboy magazine, and the attack that he went under was incredible. The Atlantic magazine, which I don't know if anybody reads the Atlantic magazine here, but I just want to tell you, it's my #1 life goal to make sure that you know that is one of the most corporate-funded, awful magazines in this country. I mean, they take money from union busters. They hold these special corporate salons where they'll invite all their journalists, and ExxonMobil will pay $100,000 to get the whole staff and recruit some other journalists. I mean, this is what the Atlantic magazine is about, and the reporting was that. So this reporter by the name of Megan McArdle wrote about attacking Mark and Yasha when they first wrote about the Koch brothers in early 2009. And she said, I know the Kochs, and they would never fund anything like that. They don't do AstroTurf. They don't do misleading front groups. And, Playboy was forced to take down the ad, the article, because the Atlantic magazine is a well-prominent magazine. What Megan McArdle didn't reveal in her article is that her husband is the head of FreedomWorks, one of the Koch's biggest front groups. And that she had personally, had a Koch fellowship when she graduated from college. I mean, there's a whole pipeline. I mean, it's incredible to watch these conservatives come. The moment there's a conservative who's semi-literate and likes to write for a paper, I don't care how bad their writing is, they can get fellowships, they can get internships, they can get money throughout the wazoo. I mean, I see these guys on TV and they don't represent anybody. They claim to represent groups like, the Association for Worker Freedom, and they're talking about, repealing the National Labor Relations Act and undoing unions. I mean, it's incredible. And what Mark brought up to me is that, he was surprised how much he got attacked, even by some mainstream people off of the Atlantic. I mean, Mark once said to me, the oligarchs have taken so much power here in the United States. It's like Russia in the 1990s. But the thing is, while the oligarchs are taking so much power, while this is basically like Rome in the amount of power they're taking, we treat politics and media in this country like it's some small town in Nebraska where we all got to be nice to each other. And this is a no-holds-barred game. And just to close off, one thing I do want to talk about, talk about the Kochs and the influence of ALEC. I saw somebody handed me a really good flyer earlier, the list of all the state legislators using ALEC. And for those not familiar with ALEC is, it's the American Legislative Exchange Council. And what they do is a lot of state legislatures, like the one here in Kansas, is part-time, or they're poorly funded, they don't have a lot of staff. So big corporate lobbyists draft these bills that, you can essentially, erase, Oklahoma and put in Kansas, or erase Kansas and put it in Minnesota, and it'll appear in the state legislature, sometimes with the exact identical wording. Sometimes they'll even accidentally say the word, produced by ALEC at the bottom, and these state legislators get a little sloppy. And they'll put these in there, and these bills are just horrendous. And one of the biggest, most perverse areas that they've had an effect on workers in this country is the rise of prison labor, which most people aren't aware of. In 1980, there were about 800,000 prisoners in jail. Now there's close to 3 million. That's nearly an increase of 400%. We have the largest incarceration ratio of any industrialized country. We have more than China. We have 1 out of every 100 American adults in prison. That's an incredible amount. So why did this happen? Was it the first big sponsors that came onto ALEC were a group called the GEO Group and CCA, Corrections Corporation of America? And what they wanted to push for was, in the past, there wasn't an incentive to keep people in jail because, it's expensive. It's really expensive. It's like doing a year at Harvard, basically. There wasn't as big of an incentive to keep people in jail. But ALEC came along and realized, with the help of these prison groups, there's a lot of money to be made in private prisons. So they started working in 1981 to get some of the first states to pass legislation that would privatize prisons. Now all of a sudden, you got a reason for keeping people in jail because you make a lot of money off of it. And then once they dramatically ballooned the population of prisons by, almost 400%, they said, well, shit, under the Constitution, you don't have to pay prisoners minimum wage. I mean, actually, there's a federal standard that said you have to pay them a prevailing wage, so you can deduce the fees of costing them in prison. So, you know, there's an incentive now if you can have prisoners do work. So they worked nationwide to pass something called the Prison Industries Act. Previously, the laws passed in this country said you don't have to pay prisoners minimum wage, but you do have to pay them prevailing wage, what the local area makes, you know, what the local carpenter makes. You have somebody working as a carpenter, they have to make what a carpenter does. And it made prison labor kind of restrictive. But see, now Alec figured out a loophole, which is that, well, you know, states deduce money for the room and board of prisoners out of this prevailing wage. Well, they figured out something better, that they could pay these employees 23 cents an hour if they took that money, that prevailing wage, and they created a prison industries expansion account, which was basically like a corporate slush fund for prison industries. So if you wanted to set up a tire factory that could sell tires on the open market, they would fund it through money that was supposed to be going to prisoners. They found a way to divert that, and it led to a dramatic expansion. Now we're looking at close to about 300,000 people in prison working in prison industries. There's almost 200 factories that could sell directly to the public market. Previously, prisoners, for the most part, could work for nothing if they're making license plates for the state or making desks for a school or something that was state-sponsored or governmental. But now they can produce right for the public market. I mean, they make office chairs. You can go to Lazy Boy and buy office chairs made by prisoners. They make meat that goes right into, you know, the supermarkets throughout this country. And we're seeing this dramatic expansion. I mean, to give you a recent example, and the loss, I mean, this is the real kicker, is that Alec worked with some people at the federal level to get a law passed called the PIAS, the Prison Industries Enhancement Act, in '95. And what this law specifically said is that it helped transfer, in part, the authority of who regulated prisons from the Department of Justice to an organization called the National Corrections Industry Association, which the board of the national, you know, the NCIA, the National Corrections Industry Association, is made up of the heads of all these private state partnerships in these prison industries. So it's basically like having Wall Street regulate itself. And it's led to a lot of abuse. I'll give you a recent example. Warren Buffett, right? He's attracted a lot of attention for saying that rich people should pay their fair share. But Buffett doesn't, you know, want workers to necessarily get a fair wage. He's been using a lot of prison labor. And so he recently got caught by the Canadian government sneaking wood flooring that was made by prison labor into Canada in violation of the Canadian law. And what they basically had to come out and admit was, I'm going to wrap this up, is that they had been doing this for 15 years. That they had been getting away with breaking the law in terms of sending goods in. And not only were they doing this for 15 years, but they also had broken federal law. Because federal law says every good that's prison made has to be labeled. Because of the lack of regulations, it's gone untouched. So I know I've touched on a lot of subjects. Why don't I just open up the questions? Sorry to bombard people with a lot of different things.
If you have a question or a comment for Mike Elk, would you please come down to the front, just stand in a line here. We'll take as many of you as we can. You know, we're running a little behind. We do have to eat lunch, but yes, we want to have some questions and comments, so walk on down, please.
Is the information on the Kochs available in your article in The Nation?
Which information?
Well, you ran through so much material that I'm struggling to remember which is which.
So the information about the workplace political intimidations in an article called Thought Control at Koch Industries, published by Mark Ames and Mike Elk, April 2011. You can find that on Google. And the article about prison labor was published in August. Mike Elk and Bob Sloan, titled Alec and the Secret History of Prison Labor.
Just wanted to comment that possibly the next thing up for privatization in Kansas is Medicaid. And along with that, it's going to be the group of people with disabilities, which means that a private for-profit insurance company will be deciding
where they live, where their group homes are, what kind of day programs they will have, and this will supposedly be determined by a for-profit insurance company.
Thank you. Good statement.
Hi. Really close. Okay. I don't really necessarily believe in conspiracies, but the push to make judges not appointed but elected, that would open up corporate money to influence who gets elected to become a judge, and I could see this prison system. I mean, it's like, it's unbelievable. If you have a corporate judge deciding who goes to prison and the legislature enacting the laws, this could be interesting.
I haven't looked into that so much, but if you remember Michael Moore's film Capitalism, in Wilkes-Barre there was a juvenile detention facility that was run by a private prison company, and the judge who was sentencing all these people to the private prison company, they later found out was taking bribes from the private prison company, so they were sentencing youth for all kind of crazy stuff that teenagers do.
It's just a real push to make judges elected, accountable to the people, that kind of thing.
I've got one more question. I've been talking to some people who live in Wichita, and they're saying that actually to become an employee of Koch Industries, it's an implied thing that you're supposed to contribute to ALEC every year as a part of your dues. I mean, it goes into this whole thing. So they're not even using their money, they're using their employees' money to lobby against them. So have you heard about that?
Yeah, I've heard about that. If anybody has any good stories, I'd really like to do something on this. So find me afterwards, and it'd be great to talk about.